Moment when action must follow the outrage and rhetorical condemnation. The tragedy of Malaysian Air 17 will be, I believe, a defining event in history. Malaysia Air Flight 17 reveals to any remaining doubters the nature of Putin and his brutal ambitions and ruthlessness.
Senator Coates also said it is time for the civilized world to make the choice crystal clear for Russian President Vladimir Putin to de-escalate the crisis in Ukraine. He accused the Russian president of imperial ambitions motivated by pathological insecurities.
Senator Dan Coates joins us now from Capitol Hill. Senator, you really come at this from two areas of expertise. You're on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate right now. Presumably, you have seen evidence that the rest of us are not privy to about what involvement Russia may or may not have had, direct involvement in this tragedy. You were also ambassador to Germany, so you have lived in the shadow of the new Russian nation. So at this point, what would you like to see happen?
I would like to see the world unite, in particular the United States and the European Union, led by our president, led by Chancellor Merkel of Germany, the most important country there in Europe, imposing crippling sanctions on the Russians if they do not stand down and pull back from this, acknowledge their complicity in this tragedy, and stand down from what they're doing in Ukraine. I think Putin needs a very clear choice. Either do this or we will slap crippling economic sanctions on your country, and it'll hurt all Russians.
Those crippling economic sanctions on his country would likely have a crippling effect on many of the European countries, and they're showing some great reluctance on their part to go along with these sort of harsh, decidedly harsh sanctions against Russia. We can talk about energy and economic dependence. How do you navigate that? You know this very well from being the ambassador to Germany. How do you navigate that and get agreement in all parts of the European Union?
Well, you ask the European nations to take a look back at their history. If you allow a bully, if you allow a despot continued leash in terms of doing what they're doing, you're going to pay a much steeper and harder price later. So why not do it now? Why not get to the point right now? Because you're going to pay a big price as the Russian dog takes ever bigger bites out of Eastern Europe, and whether it's the Baltics, whether it's Poland, whether it's a number of border states that belong in the European Union, they may be next on the list.
But they seem to be willing to let this happen, at least so far. These European leaders have been meeting this week. They've had the opportunity to make big, bold statements. Do you think this is a moment of truth for German Chancellor Angela Merkel? She clearly, perhaps, the most crucial leader in that region.
Well, you're correct on that. She grew up behind the Iron Curtain, and she knows the Russians and speaks Russian fluently, knows it better than anybody else. She has to understand what is at risk here, and I think she needs to take the lead. And if Germany takes the lead and we work with them, we've been pretty timid ourselves here in terms of what's coming out of the White House and the president's rhetoric, not followed by real strong action. If we take the lead together, I think we can address this issue and make, as I said, Putin give a very clear choice as to what he wants the future of Russia to be relative to what we can do.
Senator, while we have you, I wonder if you take a moment to comment on the situation that we've been watching in Israel, on the FAA ban on flights to and from Israel. The former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, said that these restrictions are a mistake and essentially amount to an undeserved victory for Hamas. How do you view it?
Well, I view it as that there's a risk here, and we ought to be cognizant of that. Obviously, there's been adjustments made in planes flying across Ukraine, given the instability that exists there in eastern Ukraine and the tragic consequence of their firing a missile at Malaysian Air 17. And so, but I leave that to the authorities and the Israelis and others to determine, and of course our U.S. airlines to determine whether it is safe to go in there. The Israelis provide great protection, and I leave it to those experts to make that determination.
Senator Dan Coates from Indiana, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate your insight, your expertise on this subject.